Everyone, and welcome to another live session with Markham and myself. And today we are going to be responding to a Substack posted by Bill Whitelaw. I'm going to link it below in the comments so everyone can get on the article. And we wanted to respond and start talking about energy literacy in Canada. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Markham. Let's get this started.
Well, this is not my first rodeo, folks. I was on our website and I was looking for my old columns, and I wrote my first one about pushing back against Alberta's view of energy literacy back in 2017. So this is like almost like a decade. We've been fighting this fight, and Whitelaw's Substack is titled "Canada's Pipeline Debate is Also a Critical Energy Literacy Debate." And so let's set this up by, I'll just quote a little bit from his Substack. When I started this, oh, and I should point out, Bill Whitelaw has been around for a long time. I think he's worked entirely in the Alberta oil and gas industry, and he's very much an oil and gas insider. He worked for the Oil Bulletin, and he's involved in all sorts of industry, organizations and events and so on. So Bill Whitelaw is, the consummate insider in the oil and gas industry in Alberta. Okay, that's who Bill Whitelaw is. Here's what he wrote. When I started this Substack, I called it Next Gen ESL, Energy as a Second Language. Its premise was simple. Canadians need a major shot of energy literacy in order to think critically and constructively about energy choices. Put bluntly, as a country, we are generally not literate vis-a-vis energy. What Whitelaw means is that we are not literate about oil and gas. And,
Yeah.
what Canadian needs to know uh, about oil and gas and pipelines other than when they go to the gas station and they, put the pump in their tank and they fill it up. And I mean, what more do they really need to know? They need to know some basics, but oil and gas is incredibly complex. Over the years, I first worked in it in 2003. I've been reporting on it since 2008, and it is, when you talk about the oil sands and pipelines and refineries and upgraders and on, it's very complex and it's very technical. So asking Canadians to be literate about oil and gas is one thing. Conflating energy literacy with oil and gas literacy is what I really take issue with. And here's what he says, and this kind of sets the tone. He says, is this a turning point in the way Canadians can talk about energy like adults? Okay. Well, so what does that mean? Talk about energy like adults. Well, and it goes on, the Substack goes on to quote some polls. And in
Yeah.
fairness, like these polls show that there's been since Donald Trump threatened Canada and threatened to put tariffs on Canadian oil and gas and electricity exports, our exports into the United States. Yes, there's been a big increase in public support for major projects like this pipeline that was the subject of the Canada-Alberta MOU last week. Absolutely. Does that mean that Canadians are any more literate or understand oil and gas anymore? No, it's that they understand something needs to be done. A pipeline has been proposed as one way to redirect our exports away from the US or at least diversify them into Europe and Asia. That's what they support. It's not like they suddenly had some coming to Jesus moment about oil and gas. They just understand the need to diversify the markets for our exports. And I'm sure they would feel the same way about timber and minerals and grain and so on. So here's the problem. So back in 2017, the industry launched this quiet campaign to have a rational conversation about energy with Canadians. And what they meant by rational conversation was that they were going to talk and you were going to listen and then you were going to agree with them. And I remember this one fellow because he was all of a sudden his name popped up out of nowhere. Mike Slubicki. He was a CEO of a Calgary-based oil and gas company. I think he might have actually been a gas producer. And guy in his mid-40s, well-spoken, presented himself well. And he would come out, there'd be video, and he would come out on the stage and he would talk about oil and gas, and he would say, well, I'm going to give you a bunch of facts. I'm going to educate you, basically. We're going to have a rational conversation. I'll talk, and then you agree with me. And it's conversations. Now, you would never know it from here because I'm doing all the talking and you're doing all the listening. But when you and I generally have a conversation, we talk to each other and we respond, and there's back
Yeah,
and forth, right?
absolutely.
That
Hmm.
is not the conversation that Alberta wants to have. They want to tell you about oil and gas, and then they want you to get the big, I heart oil and gas hoodie and join the cult, is what they want. So here's my point. Albertans are energy illiterate because there is a conversation going on at the global level in places like Asia and Europe, in the global south, China, all over the place, about the energy transition and how major the parts of the world are rapidly electrifying. And so when we say electrify, we mean like on the supply side of electricity, we mean they're adopting wind and solar and batteries. That is driving a lot, taking up almost all of the demand in energy growth. But then on top of that, you also get some additional hydro. You get some additional nukes. China, for example, has got nuclear power plants that are being built, some more hydro dams that are being planned. So it's electricity is the basis of this new energy system, or how the energy system is transforming. And and we know because we interview, since we started doing Zoom interviews in 2019, our goal has been to the 400 or 500 interviews we do with energy experts in a year, half of them are outside of Canada. And they'll be in the UK or Asia or the US. And once you start to talk to people like that and then read the literature, you quickly discover there is a rich trove of literature and information and data and analysis about the electrification of the global economy. It has nothing to do with oil and gas. Well, maybe gas a little bit on the power sector side. And Bill Whitelaw and his cohorts, his fellow cultists, know nothing about that. Absolutely nothing. And we got into it about a year and a half ago,
Yeah, it
on
was.
LinkedIn, and had a little scrap about it. I'll maybe toss it back to you.
Well, I just wanted to shout out to some of our listeners who are online right now. We've got Sleeping Giant, Mish Ashdown. We've got Ian, Neolithic Transit Revolution, who is one of our big fans and also a member of the channel. We also are live on Facebook, and for the first time, Markup, we have gone live today on Substack, which is really exciting, and we've got quite a few viewers over there as well. Now, I want to get back to one point that you made a bit earlier, and you were talking about how there is more support for pipelines than ever in Canada. And and Bill, quotes several different polls. Now, one of the things that jumps out for me is what other options are being presented in these polls. If you said somebody, oh, do you support this? It's kind of a yes or no question. It's not like they're being, okay, what do you think about this? What do you think about bitumen beyond combustion? They're not being given a kind of a menu of options about how to diversify the economy or talk about energy in different ways. They're asked very specific, pointed questions in these polls. So, I mean, for me, that's what jumps out. Yeah, okay. Do you support a pipeline? Well, I don't know. What, maybe I support doing something. Yes.
There was back in 2017, 2018, there were the Trans Mountain expansion pipeline fight
Right.
it was raging. I mean, this was BC and Alberta were going at each other, hammers and tongs, and the federal government was caught up in it, and it was a big fight. And the National Energy Board is the agency, the regulator. It's a federal regulator that's responsible for pipelines across provincial borders. And somebody did a poll about the NEB. And they said, do you approve of the job that the NEB is doing? And it came back like 75 or 80% of the Canadians came back, or the respondents came back and said, yes, we think the NEB is doing a really good job. And then they came back and said, do you know what the NAB does? And 75 or 80% of them came back and said, no, we haven't got a clue. We don't know what an NAB does. And it's kind of like that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
okay, so you approve of pipelines and 65% of you think another pipe. What do you know about the pipeline? Or what do you know about the demand in Asia for heavy crude that the pipeline is supposed to serve? Well, they don't know anything. I mean, why would we wouldn't expect them to, right?
No.
Again, getting back to the point that this is a highly technical and complex story, and so it's kind of this is a poll like the NEB poll. It has limited value, except that the folks who support the pipeline use it as they trumpet it as evidence that great Canadian support for this particular project. And at this moment, that's probably true. I'm not denying that. Um, but the point. So let's get into this little. This I'll give us some background on the dispute between Bill and myself, summer of
Yeah.
August of 2024. So one of the folks in our energy circle sent me a link to a University of Alberta online training course about the energy transition. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And they had a free version where you could go in. You didn't get a certificate, but you could go in and take it. And it's long. It's like 10, 12 hours of video. And there's, it's a slog. But here's
Hmm.
the thing. It only posited two energy worldviews. The one that we call here at Energy Media, we call it the oil and gas forever, which is, that there's going to be growing demand for oil and gas well out to 2050 and beyond. And what we call the world is on fire, which is essentially the climate activists. You
Right.
need to, the planet's going to burn up because of global warming, and we need to phase out oil and gas right away. And so it's almost like a false dichotomy. They're strong. They use the world is on fire worldview as a straw man, which they
Yep.
can they can say, well, that's not really practical. Come on. I mean, no, people aren't going to stop driving their cars or heating their houses in the middle of an Alberta winter, because of climate change. And so once they set up the straw man, they knocked it down, and then they went on to spend the rest of the course describing about, talking about oil and hydrogen from gas, and talking about all the reasons why oil and gas expansion of oil and gas was important to ending energy poverty in the global south, all that kind of stuff. Nowhere did it talk about the third worldview, which we call the future's electric. It's the one that we think best suits the evidence out there. And given my background, and I've talked about this before, where 40 years ago I did my graduate work, and it was all about the transition from horses and steam to, tractors and combines in Saskatchewan, farming.
Hmm.
And I had to read all the technology adoption literature. And the future is electric worldview is based on all of that old tech adoption theory and all the scholarship that's come over the last 40 years. And now there is a very, very large and robust uh, uh, group or a community of scholars and researchers and journalists and so on outside of Canada. And we've interviewed many of them. You look at Ember Energy, people like Kingsmill Bond and Dan Walter and Sam Butler Sloss. You look at Rocky Mountain Institute in U.S. You look at the International Energy Agency, which gets slammed in Alberta all the time as being nothing but political hacks. In fact, that's exactly the opposite. And they put out many, 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 many reports, very detailed technical reports on various aspects of the energy transition, like it might be take up of solar in Tanzania or whatever it
Right.
is. So
Hmm.
there is so much information now about how the electric technologies have passed the inflection point on the S curve. They're increasingly competitive with fossil fuel technologies, and will in short order overtake them. The IEA is now calling for peak oil demand in 2029, not 2030, 2029. They're moving it up.
Yeah.
And So I wrote a column, and I admit I was a little harsh on the course. And what I said, the fellow who developed it is Professor Brad Hayes, who it really is a first-rate geoscientist, and by all accounts a very good petroleum consultant. He has been working in the industry for 30 or 40 years, and I had absolutely no problem with his qualifications in the oil and gas industry. What I said was that doesn't qualify him to be an energy transition expert. And I've said this over and over again, and it just enrage. If you ever see an oil and gas engineer respond to that argument, it really enrages them. They get really angry. How dare you say, that we don't know energy? You don't know energy. You know oil and gas. Within that box, Alberta oil and gas engineers are as brilliant as any other oil and gas engineer on the planet. The 5 years I spent in the oil patch, every day I was talking to oil and gas engineers, and I
Yeah.
know how clever they are, and I know how good they are at solving these kind of technical issues. But being a well workover engineer or a completions engineer or a pipeline engineer does not qualify you to be an expert in wind turbines or solar panels or batteries or electric vehicles or any of the other things that make up, the electric part of the energy system. And that was my argument, is that Brad Hayes wasn't qualified as an energy transition expert. And the composition of the course that he created was proof positive of my argument.
Yeah.
Because had he been an energy transition expert, he would have known, he would have been aware of all of this body of literature and research and analysis out there that talked about the electric side of the energy transition. That's the problem. So if you argue that the energy transition is only about oil and gas versus climate, then you shut yourself off to the other half of the argument. And I thought it was a legitimate argument. I was a little rough on Brad, I admit that, but nevertheless, the argument was sound, and I backed up my argument with quotes and all of the ways that I usually do. Bill blew a gasket and said some very nasty things about me on LinkedIn and so on. So I wrote another column the next day, which I called Alberta Oil Status Quo Hacks Outraged Over Even the Mildest Criticisms. August 21st, 2024, if you want to go and find it. In fact, we'll put it in the video description
We will. Yeah.
so that people can go and read about this debate. And so here is Bill, 18 months later, making a similar kind of argument. It's all about oil and gas. Now, he says, now, in fairness to Bill, I don't want to misrepresent his argument. He says that, and this is a bit of a change, to be honest. He says, now we can talk about a dual track energy system. We
Hmm.
can talk about clean energy investment and oil and gas. But yeah, we still need to learn. We're still not literate on oil and gas. And I can tell you what Canadians need now is not oil and gas literacy, it's energy transition literacy. They need to understand the importance of why we need a national power grid that is 2 to 3 times
Hmm.
the size of what we have now. They need to understand the importance of electrifying industry. Whether it's a steel plant, an aluminum plant, well, I guess aluminum plants are almost by definition electrified, but maybe it's forestry, maybe it's the oil sands. Like, why are we talking about $50 billion to install carbon capture and storage when there are electric options? Like, we've done a story about the Calgary-based Accelaware, which has this
Right.
big downhole heater for SAGD oil production, in situ oil production, and basically it's a big microwave, and you heat it up and you put it downhole, and the heat radiates out and makes the oil less viscous, so it'll flow and you can pump it up to the surface. There are options, electrical options, and we don't ever talk about those kinds of things. So this really is kind of a burr under my saddle, is that this conflating of energy with oil and gas by Albertans, and this arrogance, the
Hmm.
hubris, that we're illiterate, and we say if we only knew, if we only understood, if we were literate in oil and gas, we would love oil and gas. And I'm arguing, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say this line in his Substack says Canadians are also connecting the dots between red tape and energy security. And this gets to the point you're making here is like energy security he's talking about is oil and gas because energy security, if we look at it going forward, you know, it is, it does definitely include an electric future. And this is the way it's presented here is, he's not really addressing any of that.
Well, here's an interesting. So, very often I get into discussions with folks in the Alberta oil and gas industry, and they talk about energy transition as being an adequate supply of oil and gas, like hydrocarbons, so you have enough supply at a low enough price that everybody can basically have as much energy as they need. You have enough gas to heat your house. You have enough uh, gasoline or diesel to put in your vehicles and transport our goods around and so on and so forth. That's energy security to them.
Right.
That is not what energy security is increasingly about in places like Asia, where from their point of view, when you're a fossil fuel importer, an oil and gas importer like China,
Hmm.
fluctuations in the price of oil or LNG, fluctuations in the price of, coal, if you were importing coal. All of those are, in fact, energy insecurity, not energy security. So the way they define uh, energy security now is I will buy or manufacture solar panels and wind turbines. I will install as many of them as I can. And here I'm talking primarily about China, because China is deploying renewables at a phenomenal rate. I will electrify, I'll build up my power sector. Then I will manufacture the devices on the demand side, like electric vehicles and heat pumps and industrial heat for industrial processes, like the Rondo heat battery, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And I can generate all of my electricity domestically. I can produce all of my devices domestically. Now I don't have to import my energy. That's energy security. If you look at China, there's a couple of choke points in the shipping routes where if those get closed off, China runs out of oil. China runs out of LNG. Well, that's a security risk. Like if, China sees itself as a rising geopolitical power. And
Right.
I made this point in an essay a few days ago because I forget who I quoted, but the we have to understand that China doesn't want to just be like us. They want to be the number one hegemonic power in the world. They want to supplant the USA as the preeminent superpower. And so they think in terms of not just energy or the economy, they think in terms of geopolitics. They think in terms of national security, in military terms. So like if we get into a hot confrontation with the US and they choke off these 2 points and starve us of oil and LNG, what does that mean from a strategic point of view to our military, to our economy
Right.
as we're involved in this conflict? Well, we can't have that. We can't be dependent on somebody else's supply of energy to us. We have to do it domestically so that we're not vulnerable to like that. And this is my point, is that people like Bill are just completely clueless about those kinds of debates that are taking place at the global level. And they
Yeah.
have a tremendous amount of influence on the strategies that countries undertake. So, for instance, I did a piece, a video a month ago, and I said, if you look at Asia, there are 4 countries in Asia, and Malaysia was one, that have explicit uh, oil and LNG substitution policies. They want to end their imports of oil and LNG because it increases their insecurity. The other nations are in Asia are not explicit, they're implicit. So, for instance, if you see China does not have an explicit policy of ending oil and gas imports, but as it increases its supply of electricity and all of the devices that use it, then it's implicit that oil consumption will fall, gas consumption will fall because it'll all be increasing electrified. So there's a
Right. Right.
there
Right.
explicit policies, implicit policies or implicit strategies, and that's what's going on. Completely lost on people like Bill Whitelaw, the magnitude of what's happening at the global level.
Well, one of the things that's been really important in the discussions that we've had, and also in a lot of the work that you've been doing, is is talking about the economy. And I think here, part of the problem is it still is that kind of that other narrative. It's either oil and gas narrative, or it's the environmental, the world is on fire narrative. And directly here, he talks about, however, investment in clean technology is no longer seen as a threat to economic growth. 81% of Canadians now support increased funding in clean energy, including oil producing provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan. Okay, but also, there's a whole other part of the economy that we're missing if we're only taking the environmental perspective. We're not looking at, the jobs that can be created. What does this new economy look like? And I think that that part is definitely missing from this Substack article.
I would agree. And let's go one further because today we ran an interview with Richard Masson,
Yes.
who's with
Uh-huh.
the Northern Native Co-op, and they have got a project where they've got proprietary technology that will take dilbit. Now, so bitumen from the oil sands is very thick. It's like peanut butter. It needs about 30% of a light hydrocarbon, like if you think of gasoline, for example, and you
Right.
dilute the bitumen to a point where it'll flow in the pipeline. So that's what goes down to Houston or Chicago, Detroit, Denver, whatever. It's not bitumen, it's dilbit that goes in there. So what they do in this case is that in Hardisty, just outside of Edmonton, there is a dilbit recovery unit, DRU, and it's owned by Gibson Energy. And what it does is it has a pipeline and the dilbit comes down and it goes in through the DRU and all the dilbit gets taken out and shipped back up to Fort McMurray to be reused. Then it becomes drubit or neatbit. And really that's just about depends on what percentage of diluent is left in them. And what NNC has got is a proprietary shipping container where this instead of being 8 feet tall, it's 4 feet high, and it has a sleeve inside. And what you do is you pack the bitumen inside the shipping container, inside that sleeve, and you ship it basically in the shipping container over to Asia, where it will be used for making roads. Asphalt binder, it's called.
Asphalt binder. Yeah.
And and you get basically double the price for asphalt binder that you get for a barrel of bitumen sent down to a refinery. And it has all sorts of benefits. Like at the other, and I should mention because I would ask, what do you do at the other end? It's ingenious. They've got this device that tips the shipping container over, if I understand it correctly, 90 degrees, and then the side of the container falls open, and the bitumen and the plastic just fall into a pit, a heated pit, and that's where they warm it up again, and then they combine it with aggregate, little rocks, and it turns into asphalt. So it's as
Hmm.
simple as that. And here so they've got this plan where they want to work with Gibson Energy and they will build a plant and it'll start fairly small, about 5,000 barrels a day, and then it'll ramp up from there. And instead of building a pipeline, you could rail that drubit on shipping containers out to Prince Rupert, put it on a ship that is not a tanker. It's just a standard cargo ship, and then there are no restrictions. The tanker moratorium doesn't apply to it, and then off it goes to China or whatever market wants to buy it. And there's a global market, according to Richard, of 3 million barrels a day of asphalt binder. So here is a case where, like we've been on and on about bitumen beyond combustion. It's not just about clean tech and renewables. It's what else can we do with hydrocarbons?
Yeah.
We can turn them into asphalt binder, and here's a company that is ready to go. They want to be considered to be a pony, a project of national interest under the One Canadian Economy Act, just like the pipeline will be, or has been already actually. And they want it to be fast-tracked and they want to get access to federal support so they can scale up in a very rapid manner. There's carbon fiber, which will be able to make bitumen, carbon fiber out of bitumen in a year or two in Alberta. There's activated carbon. I mean, there's so many things we can do with bitumen, and then and including with gas that doesn't include fuels. And so when from here we think of the energy transition as electrify everything and start using hydrocarbons as feedstock for advanced materials manufacturing, not fuels. Now that's not going to happen tomorrow, right? There'll be a transition period, but
So there's a question here from Mitch Ashton, who's asking, does shipping the solid leave light oil that can be piped as a byproduct?
not not in the case of the asphalt binder.
Right,
If you make
okay.
carbon fiber, then it does because only 20 to 50% of the barrel of bitumen is actually asphaltenes that you can use to make carbon fiber. The rest then become, once you take the asphaltenes out, you're left with the light sweet crude. And the folks at Alberta Innovates have done this calculation. They've done the modeling. And so whatever you get, when they say if you got $50 for a barrel of bitumen, if you sold it to a refinery, you would get $217 if you made carbon fiber out of it. Part of that is selling that barrel of, whatever percentage is left of light sweet crude on the market, and the revenue you would get from that. So
Right.
that yes, there is light sweet crude when you make carbon fiber, but not when you're making the asphalt binder, the drubit.
Okay, so there's one more, getting back to the article here, but what we were really talking about, there's one more thing I wanted to talk about, and that's talking about energy as a language. Bill talks about energy being this language, and in talking about how Canada should have three official languages, English, French, and energy. And and I guess for me, I want to hear your perspective on that. Well, how would you respond to that comment?
Again, I get back to this is really arrogant because what he's talking about is, and he might argue that in this essay, he's not really talking about just oil and gas because he does mention clean tech and he does mention,
Yeah,
clean. But historically, it's stuff that I've read of his going back a fair ways. That's not what he meant. And I know certainly that's not what the industry generally means. When they say energy, they mean oil and gas. And this has been under a burr under the saddle. It's really annoyed the environmentalists and the climate activists because, for them, energy also includes electricity. It includes clean hydrogen. It includes lots of other things other than oil and gas. But this is part of, I think our audience understands the extent to which the oil and gas industry in Canada has an amazing narrative machine. Amazing. They spend tens of millions of dollars every year to lobby government to put out social media posts and get things published in the media and to speak at various events and on and on. There's this giant narrative machine that comes out of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. That's the main engine of the narrative machine. But there are all kinds of others, like the Small Producers Association, ES, I can't remember what his name is, and Serva. They're all part of that narrative machine. Then you get astroturf organizations like the Canada Action and on and on and on. And then they just, and you get people like Brett Wilson, who's just in the industry, but has got this huge social media presence where he's always droning on about oil and gas as if he actually knows something about the energy transition. So combine them all together, and it's just like this onslaught of oil and gas narrative all the time. That's all you hear about. Danielle Smith. Oh,
well,
there's
I just
the
want to say in the comments here, Morgan, we've got a comment that says we would be the only news network using the third official language of Canada. So that's a real compliment for energy media. But
there aren't
yeah, and
many.
and and we talked a little bit offline before the show about about this issue of incumbency and who is an incumbent and how are we changing the conversation in Canada. And this is just another example of an incumbent megaphone.
Well, it is, and there's a lot of literature about how when an incumbent industry, and oil and gas isn't the only one. There's the utility sector is an incumbent
Right.
industry. There are others, and when an innovative disruption comes along, the disrupted incumbent looks at that and goes, "Well, you know what? I see the value of that. I understand why there's, but you know what? We're making our money over here." And we're going to stick with what we know because we don't really feel comfortable with it. Blockbuster is a classic example, right?
Yeah.
We use this all the time. Blockbuster in 2006 took Netflix came to them and said, "Would you buy us for 50 million? Here's our business plan." And Blockbuster went through it and said, "Nah, we're going to pass." 4 years later, Blockbuster's, bankrupt, and Netflix now is just a monster. It's a global, you know, conglomerate and
Yeah.
dominates content production. So, the innovative disruption here was streaming video, and and Blockbuster saw it coming. It's not like it snuck onto the radar. Blockbuster saw it coming and didn't want to disrupt, didn't want to change their model, which was quite profitable for them at the time. And so they ignored it. And Clay Christensen, the Harvard professor, he's the one who kind of coined this term and has done a lot of the theoretical work, at least 30 years ago to get it started. And he said, there's a long list of big companies that were well managed and profitable that didn't respond to the innovative disruption of their business model and failed. And
Right.
there are not many that actually adjusted or adapted. IBM would be one. Like when I was 40 years ago, when I was in university, IBM meant computers, right? Now
Yeah.
IBM doesn't make computers, IBM sells services. So
Yeah.
they pivoted, they re-engineered their business model, but that's very unusual. Very unusual. Usually what the status quo incumbents do is they double down on the status quo. And that's what the oil and gas industry is. It's beginning to see disruption coming at the global level. And the biggest one, folks, is not in the oil and gas industry. It's in the automobile industry because 50% of all global oil demand comes from the transportation sector. And
Right.
China is driving down the cost of electric vehicles to the point where, well, MC, now you've just moved to Brazil, and in your market, you can buy a very well-built Chinese EV from like BYD for 15 to $20,000.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And you
there's
get
multiple different different brands out there that are not available in Canada and Europe.
right, and they're all over the place. Last
Yeah.
year, China exported 6 million automobiles. Most of them, many of them would be EVs, and the percentage that have a plug is rising. And they're electrifying the transportation sector, and particularly in Asia. So that is the disruptive innovation. So as the number of electric vehicles rises, the number of internal combustion engine vehicles drops, and it's now down to about 70% of all vehicles sold and dropping like a rock. And that then becomes, after a while, it affects your oil demand because
Right.
all the vehicles are running on electricity. And that's why the IEA, in its modeling, says that peak oil demand is coming in 2029, 3 years away, is because electric vehicles are displacing internal combustion engines. It's as simple as that. And Bill was on back in the days when Bill and I were talking to each other. Bill was on as you imagine, he didn't appreciate my columns. Uh, he came on the podcast, and we were talking about this, and I said, Bill, the IEA is modeling this, and it's credible modeling, and he said, if peak oil demand arrives by 2030, I will eat my hat. Well, how do you want to serve, Bill? Because it appears more and more likely as every month goes by that the IEA is correct and OPEC is not correct. And so, I don't know what to say. This is a conversation that needs a shot of realism, I would say.
Well, and I mean, hopefully Bill's watching us, and we hope to see his reaction. I actually want to say, thanks to everyone who's joined us over there on Substack today. And if you like our content, you like what we're doing here, please subscribe to our Substack. It's absolutely free. You get access to all of our content here on YouTube. We do have memberships if you are willing to support us and help us with this thoughtful energy journalism going forward. Please purchase a membership and support us there. Subscribe to our channel, share our information with your friends through your networks at the dinner table, at the water cooler, next time you're riding the bus. Talk about this with your friends and family. And yeah, I'm going to turn it over to you, Markham, for the final word.
Promote energy literacy wherever you go by talking about the energy transition.
That's right.
I just wanted to add something to what you were saying, MC, in that memberships, any subscriptions, all of that is free and voluntary. None of our information is behind a paywall. You don't have to pay for any of it. We appreciate it if you do decide to support it. Thank you very much for those who are, but you don't have to. And I want to say at the end of the day that it's really important that Canadians do become energy literate, at least in the sense of knowing that there is another worldview out there besides oil and gas forever, and the world is on fire.
Right.
Uh, and it's the future is electric, and it really is. We're not in Canada. We're insulated. We're rich. We're a big oil and gas exporter. We're the fourth largest oil producer in the world, the fifth largest gas producer in the world. We're very invested in the fossil fuel industry. We don't feel the effects of what's going on in India and China and Brazil and all sorts of places. We just don't feel it. We don't
Yep.
see it here. Well, I want to close with this. Dave Collier, who used to be the CEO of CAP, Canadian Association of Oil Producers, 2008 to 2014. And I interviewed him many times. And Dave was an engineer. He used to run Shell Canada, but very nice guy, very straight shooter. And he would always say, he said, Markham, in Alberta, we have what we call the Alberta lens. Everything that happens in the world around energy we view through the Alberta lens. Oh, if it's not happening here, it's not happening anywhere. If it won't work here, like if it's 40 below and you got an electric vehicle or hydrogen or something, oh well, it won't work anywhere else in the world. Folks, get rid of your Alberta lens. Trust me, because we need to know what's going on in the global level because that's our competition, and they will come and eat our lunch. That's
Yep.
the problem. We're seeing now Trump is trying to eat our lunch. Well, China and other Asian countries and other global South countries are coming right behind them, and they're going to be very competitive. And just the idea that we're just shipping raw oil, raw gas, raw natural resources is got to be a thing of the past if we're going to maintain our productivity and our lifestyles.
Yeah, and one more thing before we go. If you want to increase your energy literacy, we've got that free course over on our YouTube channel now.
Oh
You
yeah.
can go check it out. It's 5 modules. Go on there, take a look. It takes about a little more than probably an hour to get through. Yeah, check it out. It's absolutely free. And that course we built in response to the University of Alberta course that came out, I guess a couple of years ago now.
Do you remember when I did that? Like I wrote that column and I was so mad when I wrote that column.
Yeah.
I said, I'm going to do a course that will be done the right way. And we've run it past some of the top folks in
Yes.
like people like Michael Liebrecht from Bloomberg NEF
Kingsmill
and
Bond.
Kingsmill Bond, Professor Doyne Farmer, who's a theorist in this field, who all said that's good stuff. And they
Yeah.
really, so we're going to be doing some more courses like the future of oil, the future of Canadian oil and gas. So keep an eye on us. We're a little busy, but when we have in our spare time, we're going to take another crack at this and come up with some new courses.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks everyone. Don't forget to
Thanks.
subscribe, like, and share, and we will be back with more of these live shows probably next week. Thanks, everyone.